They may have hoped to avoid targeting the U.S. government while they targeted this huge fuel pipeline in the United States. But this is a critical enough, large enough piece of U.S. infrastructure that, boy howdy, do they have the U.S. government's attention now. Emergency meetings all weekend long at the White House, multiple agencies briefing the public today, FBI alerts and statements of blame about the attack today, the U.S. president speaking out on this issue and talking about who will be blamed and how this will be handled. It seems like whether or not they were explicitly trying to target a government entity here, they have got a handful of U.S. government response to deal with now as this ongoing attack stretches into its fourth day. Joining us now is New York Times cybersecurity reporter Nicole Perlroth, who has been covering the ransomware attack on Colonial Energy and has covered many of these before this. Nicole, it's really nice to see you tonight. Thank you so much for making time.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the great setup. You laid it out pretty clearly there.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask you if I've missed anything either important in terms of context or anything new. I know that you've been covering this right through to tonight, you and your colleagues at the Times.
So we're just learning more about the group that's responsible. We think that they're an offshoot of this other Russian group called Revil that's been around for a while and was actually the group that was responsible for hacking a company called Quanta Inc., which is a main supplier of Apple products. And so in addition to holding up Quanta, they've threatened to release designs for all the latest Apple products. And in that case, they're making a ransom demand of something like $50 million, which is one of the highest ransom demands I've ever heard. So we think that DarkSide, the group responsible for this pipeline hack, is an offshoot of that group. And they are a little quirky. They claim they won't hack hospitals, et cetera. And it looks like they might have not even intended to hack a company that would have had such strong downstream effects like Colonial Pipeline. They put out a statement today saying, we don't like to get involved in geopolitics. And so we're trying to understand what to make of this. And I think really what we're seeing is a group that is trying to separate itself as much as possible from Russia, perhaps because they're scared of some kind of retaliation like the kind we saw the Pentagon Cyber Command pull off ahead of the election in 2020, when they were afraid that a ransomware group would hold critical election systems hostage. And there, too, they wouldn't necessarily know whether it was Russia proper that was doing that or whether it was a cyber criminal that could maintain some plausible deniability from Vladimir Putin. But in any event, U.S. Cyber Command took them offline. And so I think what we saw today was the group really coming out and trying to separate itself from Russia and Russian operations and Russia as a safe haven for so many cyber criminals and ransomware groups we're seeing these days.
Now, the Deputy National Security Advisor today, Ann Neuberger, described this as ransomware as a service, which to me was a familiar idea because of your book, but it seemed to me to potentially add another layer of plausible deniability in terms of attribution for this attack. Does that mean that essentially the FBI and the U.S. government can identify the tools that are being used here and who may have developed those tools or indeed sold those tools, but the person wielding them to carry out this attack might still be yet another bad actor, a different party?
No, it's a critical observation. They are a ransomware as a service operator. They will lease out their access to victims' networks to other ransomware groups that then use their access to hold these systems hostage, and they'll take a cut. And in their statement today, they almost seem to say this wasn't us. This was someone we had leased our service to, because they said in the future, we'll moderate who we're leasing these systems to more clearly. They didn't say it in those words, but that was essentially the message. But I think what we saw and what you described just now with the Biden administration really coming out in full force on this is a good thing. And I think in the background, what we're seeing is an administration that wants to take Russia on as a safe haven for cybercrime and ransomware and possibly more. We understand that Russia is a safe haven for cyber criminals. They don't travel to countries anymore where they could possibly be extradited to the United States. Russia will never extradite them. It really is one of the world's biggest safe havens for this activity. So even if this is not nation state backed, it is nation state enabled. And we've gotten to a point where sanctioning and indicting cyber criminals is not enough. So these days, officials are talking about things like restricting travel visas for Russian citizens or any citizens in countries that provide safe harbor for ransomware criminals, because the problem has just become so crazy. I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, we saw the Washington Police Department held up with ransomware. A few weeks ago, Honeywell was held up with ransomware. We saw this at Apple supplier held up with ransomware. And these ransomware groups are now spilling out stolen data online, which makes backups. We tell victims, back up your data so that if you're hit with ransomware, you'll be okay. Well, when criminals are now saying we're also going to dump your data online, backups don't really mitigate against that. So we're facing an innovative and very clever adversary, and there's so many of them. There are now about 30 ransomware groups out there that are hacking American companies, not just to hold their data hostage, but to threaten to leak it out online.